those bars, locked away, is an iron box. Inside the box is a silvered casket. Inside the casket, a piece of cloth 14 feet long. A cloth which bears the mysterious imprint of a crucified man. A cloth said to be the very shroud which wrapped Christ's body in the tomb nearly 2,000 years ago.
Hi, my name is Paula Gloria, and my show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. On this show, we study consciousness and how we can create our reality by better understanding who we are, the nature of our thoughts, and the nature of the reality around us that we have and the reality around us that we'd like to have. It's all about developing our awareness and our ability to comprehend new realities. One of my all-time favorite topics is the Shroud of Turin. I look upon this as a document of our extraordinary possibilities. And today I have with me an expert in this field. Dr. J.J. Hurtak is a double PhD in science, and he's going to be able to elucidate this film that I've used as a roll-in on past shows, so that we can see if we can get a glimpse using science and using our critical ability to understand an article that before has been considered only one of faith. So welcome, JJ, to the show.
Thank you, Paula. It's a great privilege to be here with you and to discuss this very important document.
Well, you have a very important life as, you know, can you just give a brief...
Right. I have a background in social science and also a background in remote sensing technology, which is the use of radar, lasers, and other technical tools.
Before you had this spiritual transformation?
Right.
You were...
Back in the early 70s, I had the opportunity to work as a consultant. I interacted with those at Jet Propulsion Lab in Los Angeles that did the Viking studies, the Mariner 9 studies, and I had the opportunity to publish some of my work. As you see here, the Mariner 9 B-frames from the early encounters with our sister planet Mars.
Well, that's interesting because wasn't Russell Targ into lasers also?
My colleague Russell Targ had an independent background at Lockheed Martin, and I'm privileged to say that he and I have recently collaborated on a new book called The End of Suffering.
Right.
So he comes from a background in the hard sciences. I come from a background in the social sciences and physics. So we both connect.
So that's why you have a double PhD. It's
right.
the social sciences and then also the hard sciences.
Correct.
Now, you had a very successful talk that you gave with Russell a few months ago here in New York.
Right, and our new book called The End of Suffering, or How to Get Out of Hell Free, quote unquote, is a look at the logic of dualism that we have in Western science, where everything is black or white. There's no middle ground, and the book highlights the work of Nagarjuna, a Buddhist thinker from the 2nd century,
right,
and his wonderful logic that goes into higher levels of how we can look at the whole spectrum of how we analyze life and realize that much of suffering is our own negativity of attachments
right,
and seeing things only in terms of black and white reality. So this type of approach plays into why we must use a higher approach to the cloth of Turin,
right,
the Holy Shroud, which I believe requires a multidisciplinary approach. That of psychology, remote sensing, the logic of ancient culture, history, all of this plays into the picture.
You know, multidisciplinary to look at it, but even multi-religious, because even though you're talking about Buddhism with your book End of Suffering, I just the other day on a call-in show was talking to the host, and actually I couldn't even get through to the screener, because I wanted to talk about miracles. And the speaker was very, he had a profound connection to Jesus, and afterwards when I spoke to him after the show ended, I started to talk to him more and brought up the resurrection. And this is something I think even very adamant Christians that do even get involved in politics, making statements about our president and so on, are very hesitant to talk about what I think is the cornerstone of Christianity, And that's why I'm so interested in the Shroud of Turin, and I'm so honored to have you come here and talk about that. Do you think we could start with the roll-in and then...
Yes, I'd like to make a little commentary on the roll-in because I knew some of the researchers at the so-called STURP, S-T-U-R-P group for the Holy Shroud scientific study group back in the late 1970s that took a critical examination of one part of the cloth. And remember, John's Gospel, chapter 20, speaks about the bandages and also the cloth that was placed over the face of Jesus.
There's biblical reference.
And the biblical reference is important because the distinction is made that this was a cloth, syndona or synology is a study of the shroud of the cloth that absorbed the sweat, absorbed what we would call the energies from the body itself during that dramatic moment. The
blood and the sweat
with the resurrection events.
Right, the blood and the sweat first.
Yes.
So that the shroud has that on it, and then later on the image, like one of the scientists said, I don't know if we're going to see that on the roll-in, but just for the viewers, one scientist said he fully expected to go over to Italy, to Turin, to come up to the shroud, you know, use his scientific instruments, find the image, you know, that there was paint or whatever, and go home. And at the end, they really couldn't figure it out. But should we start with the roll-ins?
Let's do that.
Okay. Are we ready with the roll-ins in the studio? We'll start with roll-in number 1. And this will give us
woven
an
tapestry
idea
is brought out, carried as if being taken from a tomb. This tradition goes back more than 1,000 years. Each tapestry is different, yet each one bears the image of Jesus laid out on a burial cloth, the body banked with flowers. The similarity to the shroud is unmistakable. Many say that this tradition of placing flowers around an image of Jesus in his shroud goes back.
That was a short little roll in there, but I guess they're working on the sound. So
well, it's a very important touch-in to the historical film documentaries that were done on this, and also looking at the piece of cloth that Cardinal Ballestero allowed the NASA scientists and those of the U.S. Air Force Academy, Doctors Jackson, Jumper, to work with. The problem is that part of the cloth that was selected for the scientific studies was perhaps the most handled part since it was on the edge of the cloth. In recent studies, and this is important for our discussion, those who work with the cloth covering Egyptian mummies have known that there is a coating of a carbohydrate material from 180 to 600 nanometers that covers the cloth that could distort the time factor in this. And so
for the carbon dating.
Yes, all of the carbon dating now has to be re-examined. I'm speaking now of 2006.
Okay.
Researchers are taking a look at the studies that have been done by Walter, Macron, and others.
Just a second, let me slow you down because you're a scientist to get the audience up to speed. People said that the Shroud of Turin was not authentic because the carbon dating showed that it wasn't so old. But on this roll-in that I use, the very man who invented carbon dating said, in essence, as a layman, is how I understood it, that they were carbon dating the mold that was on the fibers. So until such a time was developed where they could eliminate the mold, they can't really get an accurate read. But you may have more recent information.
Right. I was simply stating that the work of the STURP group, Walter, Macron, and others that were published, that was published in 3 scientific journals, has now been discounted by the work of Dr. Harry Gove, G-O-V-E, from the University of Rochester, and others.
It seems incredible even to suppose that the linen cloth in which Jesus was wrapped in the tomb could have survived to this day. And even more incredible that it could bear an image of Christ as he appeared after the crucifixion. But that is the claim we're about to examine. In the 20th century, we've come to rely on science to to give us simple answers to what before were universal mysteries or questions of faith. And now, after many years, we have the results of research into the Shroud, carried out here in Turin and by scientists and scholars all over the world.
Venivano insieme legati.
And their discoveries have been stranger than anyone could have expected. For 4 centuries, the Shroud has been kept here in the North Italian city of Turin. And once every 30 or 40 years, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims have flocked here for those rare occasions when the Shroud is publicly displayed, to catch a distant glimpse of the cloth's ghostly image, the image of the front and back of a man laid out in death. Faint image, but with sufficient detail to convince pilgrims they were looking at the very Shroud of Christ. Bloodstains, as of nailing through the feet. And hands. A wound in the side. Trickles of blood as from a crown of thorns. And a back covered with the marks of a savage scourging. But probably, most convincing of all, the unique and eerie quality of the whole image. For the first time, permission had been given to photograph the Shroud during one of the rare expositions. And this man, Secondo Pia, was to focus the world's attention on a new and unexpected discovery.
Spingimi avanti, dai, dai.
A lawyer by profession, Pia was a dedicated enthusiast of the new science of photography, and this was a unique occasion for him.
Avanti, avanti, su, basta.
In a few days, the Shroud would be locked away for another generation. Pia had discovered that somehow the image on the Shroud itself was a negative. Light and shade were reversed. Later and better photographs of the whole Shroud confirmed the discovery in even greater detail. The whole body could be seen much more clearly in negative. Was it, after all, possible that Christ had, in some incomprehensible way, left behind an image of himself? Certainly it was very difficult to explain how a medieval forger could have concocted a photographic negative some 5 centuries before the first camera. At the very least, the Shroud was the oldest and strangest photograph in the world. The sudden availability of detailed photographs meant that medical men could examine closely the apparent wounds of crucifixion and scourging. One of the first to do so was Yves Delage, a member of the French Academy, who was astounded at the anatomical perfection of the image, far superior to anything produced in the Middle Ages.
Who believed that we must look at the biomaterial on the surface of the cloth.
Right.
And also examine what the earlier scientific group did not do, which is the second image, which is on the backside of the cloth, showing that the light burst of radiation arc completely around the molecular structure of the material of the cloth, which would indicate, as it were, a holistic type of light explosion or bioluminescence that was around this particular person, whoever he was. He was literally in a state of weightlessness.
Right.
And this was the private conversations I had with Don Lin and others at Jet Propulsion Lab later in the 1970s, who took time to re-examine the material as it was coming forth from a different perspective.
In 1970s, so that's been like 30, 40 years of studying?
We're looking at something that's moving close to the 30-year mark. The first studies, of course, were done from the front view.
Right.
Other studies showed the three-dimensionality of the image coming out of the cloth.
Oh, right. Can you explain that? Because I don't know if we have the roll-in on that one.
Well, it's interesting that
the three-dimensionality.
Look at the cloth itself, the blood elements. Scientists were interested in the we would call the bodily fluids, as well as the type of pollen that was in the cloth, of which something like 28 samples of pollen appeared in the cloth that are indigenous to the Middle East. However, the real work, I believe, was to look at the image itself, and the scientists did not have the chance to look at the image on the backside of the cloth,
right, nor
examine the what I call bioradiation levels that would emerge from taking into consideration the buildup of biological materials on the cloth itself. And so this skews, as it were, the tests that were done in the 1970s. It puts everything back to square one.
Wow, well, you're bringing in a whole nother level than what exists on the film.
Dr. Robert Buttling, forensic pathologist at Los Angeles for many years, is probably one of the most experienced investigators in this field.
To a person experienced in the examination of injuries, this is a particularly interesting case. Instead of having an adult human body to examine, we have images of the front of the body and of the back of the body. Both of these show injuries of various types on the body, all of which are shown in such detail and clarity that a forensic examination can be made. The body is that of an adult male, and the image as it appears here measures 5 feet 10 inches in length, and the estimated body weight is 175 pounds. The body appears to be about 30 to 35 years of age. On the body is a variety of injuries, ranging all the way from simple contusions to large areas of puncture where there has been an outflow of blood. The wounds can best be divided into 5 categories. The first group concerns injuries which appear on the back. These range from the top of the shoulders down to the areas of the calf. They consist of double puncture type wounds which appear to go in a direction from lateral toward medial and downward. They have obviously been made by some implement with sharp edges, and the implement was applied to the skin in a flicking fashion in such a way as to pull out bits of skin.
Ve ne faccio vedere un tipo, uno dei tanti di quelli documentati.
I will show you one type, one of the many documented, on which you can see the ends weighted with tachilli, as the Romans called them. These were heavy balls made of metal or bone. As you can see, this whip is divided into 3 parts, which, when applied, naturally multiplies the number of strokes. If we apply this to the photos of the Shroud, for example to this one showing the calves, and if we put these small metal balls of identical size over it, you have a graphic documentation of the marks left by one of the strokes of the whip, and one only. You can see the left and the right leg. The left leg at the kneecap has very bad laceration and contusion. It is evident that the left leg bent and hit against the stones.
In the forehead and in the scalp is a series of blood stains, one of which has the configuration of a figure 3. These appear not only on the front part of the forehead, but also on the back part of the scalp and high at the vertex of the head. They were made by sharp pointed objects which have projected below the skin and produced bleeding. Their configuration is such that the implement was like a cap which rested on the head.
This wound, corresponding to a crown of thorns, probably more than any other, identifies the man as Jesus Christ. The Gospels state clearly that the soldiers invented this torture for him alone. It was certainly not normal Roman procedure. A forger would have included such wounds, but would have shown them, as all artists did, as a circlet. Instead, the whole head is covered, suggesting a rough clump of thorns. Almost certainly what actually happened. Yet one more graphic detail indicating the Shroud's authenticity.
The third group of injuries involve the area of the wrist and the forearms. In the left wrist is what appears to be a blood stain which has resulted from a puncture-type wound of the left wrist. This stain has two divergent streams which extend downward. If the left arm is moved laterally to a position where these two divergent streams are vertical as a result of gravity, we have the position of the arm at the time of the flow of blood. The blood stains which appear on the forearms are also consistent with two angles of blood flow. An injury to this part of the wrist will invariably damage the median nerve, whose function is to flex the thumb across the palm. It's interesting to note that there are no thumbs in these images. The next group of injuries are those about the feet, and they can best be seen on the dorsal image. The imprint of the right foot is pretty clear, and the heel and the toe are well defined. The left foot is less well defined. The left heel is elevated higher than the right heel, suggesting that the left foot was on top of the right instep and that a single spike was used to impale the 2 feet together.
Crucifixion took many different forms, each carefully designed to provide a slow, lingering death. The wounds on the shroud, particularly the blood flows on the arms, make it possible to accurately reconstruct the form of crucifixion used and illustrate the awful technical realities. Firstly, the nails pierced the wrists, which, contrary to the imagination of artists down the centuries, is the only place that will take the weight of a body. Suspended only by the arms, the victim would die much too quickly, probably within minutes of suffocation. So the feet have been nailed to provide the support necessary to extend the agony. The divergent streams of blood indicate two distinct positions. In the first, the weight is mainly on the wrists, with the body slumped. In the second position, to avoid suffocation, some of the weight is transferred to the feet, raising the chest and altering the angle of the arms. Thus the victim was thrown from one excruciating pain to another, until exhaustion overcame, or the legs were broken. It is even possible to calculate the final position on the cross.
The last of the injuries is an apparent wound to the side. Here, in addition to a large outflow of blood from the heart, there is also evidence of another thin, watery type substance, which is best seen on the dorsal image, where blood has flowed across the lower part of the back and is separated from the heavier blood components. The markings on this image are so clear and so medically accurate that the pathological facts which they reflect concerning the suffering and death of the man depicted here are, in my opinion, beyond dispute.
This time is used where people of goodwill, if they're saints or not, even politicians, come together and think some good thoughts, consider some progressive understandings. And I keep thinking, maybe in America we could do something like this, even though we don't quite have these astrological events where we come together to bring the greatest thinkers. This could be a time when
great interfaith dialogue can take place. And
But most of the interfaith people are progressive, but they don't really consider the power objects. They like to stay away from the miraculous. They think it's something only for devotional, unscientific people. And maybe this could be a bridge, this shroud seen as a document.
I like to think that this conversation is a spark to those in the audience who can take a look at the new documents coming out of Egypt, such as the Pistis Sophia text, which is available through our Academy for Future Science.
And we'll roll those in the credits.
And also other studies that are ongoing by leading scientists throughout the world that are looking at the whole dimension of a whole new physics of consciousness and what it will be like in the 21st century to be part of a much greater story of the Christed awareness, the Christed image